my husband, looked me in the eyes and told me he was dying. And for a moment, I believed him. That's how this story begins. Not with a scream, not with a fight, not even with a tear. Just a quiet sentence whispered across a too-white hospital room. A sentence that cracked something deep inside me. I remember the way the fluorescent lights flickered above his bed, humming faintly like they were tired of shining. I remember how the room smelled, that cold mixture of hand sanitizer and something metallic, something lonely. And I remember how his fingers trembled when I held them, as if he was reaching for salvation. "Maria," he rasped, "I don't have much time left." Those words hit me like a fist to the chest. For 17 years, I'd stood by that man, through sickness, through failed businesses, through quiet nights when we barely spoke, and loud mornings when the bills screamed louder than either of us ever could. I'd defended him when my family questioned him, made excuses for him when he forgot birthdays, dinners, promises, and simple kindness. But that day, that moment, I thought, maybe this is where everything changes. Maybe facing death would make him see me again. See us again. I remember squeezing his hand and whispering, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And yet, as those words left my mouth, I had no idea that the only thing dying in that room was the last bit of trust I had left. Because my husband wasn't dying. My husband wasn't sick. My husband wasn't fighting for his life. He was lying. Lying with the calm, steady breath of a man who had rehearsed his script. Lying with the soft blink of someone who knew he wouldn't be caught. And while I sat by his bedside, praying, crying, begging God to give us another chance, his mistress was moving into my home. Into the kitchen I cleaned every morning, into the bed I slept in every night, into the life I had built with the bones of my own sacrifices. But I didn't know any of that. Not yet. Back then, all I heard was his shallow breathing and the beeping of a heart monitor he didn't even need. Back then, all I felt was grief. Back then, I thought I was losing my husband. But the truth? I had already lost him. Long before the hospital, long before the lies, long before the heart that betrayed mine pretended to stop beating. This is the story of how I found out. How I broke. How I stood again. And how I learned that sometimes the end of a marriage is the beginning of a life. Before the hospital, before the fake tubes and the staged groans, before the whispers of, "I don't have long," my life was simple. Not perfect. Not glamorous. Just simple. We lived in a small blue house on the south side of town, the kind of place where everyone knows when you take out your trash and whose dog is always getting loose. My morning started the same way every day. The kettle whistling, the smell of butter melting on toast, the sound of the neighbor's radio playing gospel too loud through the window. I used to like those mornings. They made the world feel predictable. My husband David liked predictability too, or so he said. He liked his coffee strong, his shirts pressed, and his routine untouched. He would come down the stairs in the same slow shuffle, rubbing his eyes like a man who'd been working all night, even when he hadn't. He'd sit at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, barely looking at me as I placed breakfast in front of him. "Morning," I'd say, hoping one day he'd look up. That was his usual reply. People outside our home thought David was a quiet man, a thinker. But silence can sometimes be louder than shouting. His silence filled rooms, heavy, sharp, reminding me of everything we didn't talk about anymore. Still, I tried. I always tried. I packed his lunches, I warmed his dinner, I washed the clothes he tossed carelessly on the floor. I adjusted myself to his moods. Soft when he was tense, invisible when he was irritated. To everyone else, we were stable. To me, we were a puzzle missing too many pieces. But marriage is a complicated thing. Sometimes you learn to hold on to the parts that still fit. We didn't have children. It wasn't by choice. I lost 2 pregnancies early on, silently, quietly, carrying the grief alone because David didn't know how to comfort me. He would rub my back once, maybe twice, then retreat into himself as if my loss threatened something inside him he didn't want to feel. So, I learned to grieve softly. I filled the quiet with work. I handled accounting for a small dental clinic. Numbers were easier than people. They behaved. They made sense. They didn't change their meaning overnight. My coworkers would always ask, "How's your husband? How's home?" And I would smile, the kind of smile you practice in mirrors when you're alone. "Fine," I'd say. Just fine. I don't think I even realized I was lying. Because when you've lived in emotional drought for long enough, even a drop of affection, a rare compliment, a kiss on the forehead, a hand brushing yours, feels like a flood. And David could be kind sometimes. He could be gentle, thoughtful even. Once every few months, he'd bring me flowers. Not roses. He knew I hated roses. But chrysanthemums. Yellow ones. That smelled like autumn rain. He'd kiss my cheek and whisper, "Thought of you." And those small moments convinced me to stay. To hope. To believe we were okay. But looking back, those gestures weren't love. They were bandages on a wound he had no intention of healing. Still, I clung to them. Because when you're married, you hold on to anything that keeps the story alive. That was life before the hospital. Before the heart scare, before the lie that grew teeth and tore everything apart. If I had known then what I know now, the truth behind his late nights, the text messages he hid, the sudden work trips, the way he'd flinch when I walked into the room, maybe I would have seen the signs. Maybe I would have been ready. But I wasn't ready. Not even close. And the first clue, the first small crack in the wall, didn't show up until the week everything fell apart. And that is where the unraveling begins. To understand how everything fell apart, you have to understand how it began. Because stories like mine don't start with shouting or broken trust. They start quietly, with small compromises, soft disappointments, moments you ignore and tell yourself, it's nothing, it will get better. David and I met when I was 26 and he was 29. I used to think it was fate, the way I spilled coffee on myself at the bus stop, the way he handed me napkins with that half smile that made my heart stutter. He had charm back then, real charm, not the slick, practiced kind he carried later, but something awkward and almost innocent. Back then, David wasn't the man who would fake his death or betray me. Back then, he was gentle. He was thoughtful. He was everything I had prayed for. He would bring me soup when I was sick. He'd call just to say he missed me. He'd hold my hand in public like it meant something to him. People talk about love like it's a rush, fireworks, sparks, butterflies. But the truth is, love feels like safety. A soft place to land. And in those early years, he felt like home. But even then, Even when we were at our happiest, little shadows lurked in the corners. Tiny red flags, fluttering quietly. The first one came 6 months after we got married. We were still decorating the house, choosing paint colors, and arguing over pillows, when I suggested we invite my sister and mother over for dinner. David stiffened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just said, coldly, "I don't want people in my space." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes didn't match his smile. "Your family? They judge," he said. "I don't like the way your mother looks at me." "My mother?" I asked, baffled. "David, she loves you." "She tolerates me," he corrected. The conversation ended there. Not with a fight, but with a wall. A thin one, almost invisible. One I stepped around without noticing. Another time, maybe a year later, we were driving home from visiting my cousin. I remember the windows being rolled down, warm summer air brushing my face, the smell of barbecue drifting from someone's backyard. I said casually, "You were quiet today. Everything okay?" He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Why do you always do that?" he snapped. "Do what?" "Interrogate me." I blinked, stunned. "I just asked if you were okay. I don't need you checking up on me every minute. I'm not a child." He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just turned up the radio and shut me out for the rest of the drive. And once again, I let it go. Marriage teaches you to pick your battles. But sometimes, without realizing it, you stop noticing you're the only one compromising. Over the next few years, the small moments kept coming. The way he started guarding his phone. The way he pulled away when I hugged him from behind. The way he criticized my cooking, my voice, my spending, my laugh. Too loud, too soft, too emotional, too sensitive. Everything about me was too something. I told myself he was stressed. Work was hard. Life was heavy. Men carried burdens differently. I heard that all my life. Sometimes he'd disappear into the garage for hours, claiming he needed space. And when I'd knock, gently, softly, he'd snap, "Do you mind? I'm busy." I started walking on eggshells without even knowing it. Still, we had good days. Days where he'd kiss my forehead or wash the dishes without me asking. Days when he'd curl up beside me on the couch, resting his head on my shoulder like he used to. Those moments, they were rare, but they were enough to keep me believing. That's the thing about emotional neglect. It doesn't feel like neglect at first. It feels like hope, like waiting for the next good moment so you can pretend the bad ones never happened. And I waited. For years, I waited, telling myself fairy tale lies. He loves me. He's trying. Every marriage has ups and downs. It's not that bad. But here's what I know now. Love doesn't make your heart small. Love doesn't make you quieter, weaker, more afraid. Love doesn't shrink you, piece by piece. I wish I had learned that earlier. Because by the time David's behavior shifted from cold to strange, from distant to secretive, I was already too numb to see the danger creeping in. I had accepted the version of love he gave me. Crumbs, nothing more. And I convinced myself it was a meal. It took everything, unraveling his lies, his mistress, the hospital, for me to realize just how manipulated I'd been. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, in those middle years of our marriage, I still believed him, still trusted him, still thought we were just going through a season. It wasn't until the first clue, the moment that cracked the illusion, that the truth began to show itself. And it came quietly, so quietly, that if I hadn't looked twice, I would have missed it. The moment that changed everything didn't come with shouting or slammed doors or whispered accusations. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, a plain, gray, unremarkable Tuesday, the kind you don't remember unless something unforgettable happens on it. I had just gotten home from work, the kind of day where my feet ached and my blouse stuck to my back from running around too much. It was almost 6, that soft hour when the sky turns blue and pink at the same time. When I walked in, the house felt different. Not messy, not chaotic, just off. You know that feeling? When you walk into a room and something in the air has shifted, but you can't explain what. That was exactly what it felt like. David wasn't in the living room. His keys weren't in the bowl by the door, the one he always threw them in, loudly, carelessly. I figured he was in the garage, his favorite place to hide when life required too much from him. I headed to the kitchen, set down my purse, and that's when I saw it. A wine glass. A lipstick-stained wine glass. It sat on the counter like a tiny crime scene, catching the light in a way I couldn't ignore. The color was a rich berry shade. Not mine. I hadn't worn lipstick in 3 days. My first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was confusion. Maybe he had a coworker drop something off. Maybe my sister stopped by. But my sister would have texted. And David didn't have female coworkers who came to the house. He barely had male ones. I picked up the glass slowly. The rim was smudged, a soft half-moon print of color. The smell hit me next. Fruity. Expensive. Something we didn't drink. My heart didn't break right then, but it paused. Just for a moment. A small, tight squeeze in my chest. Something instinctual, something ancient warning me. I heard the garage door open and quickly set the glass down. When David walked in, he looked startled to see me standing by the counter. "Oh," he said, clearing his throat. "You're home early?" "Not really," I replied quietly. "It's just 6. He nodded too quickly. His eyes flicked a tiny movement toward the wine glass, and right then my stomach dropped. Not because I had proof, not because I knew, but because I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Fear, guilt, panic, all in one blink. "What's that?" I asked, gesturing toward the glass. David glanced at it like he'd never seen a cut before in his life. "That? Oh, it's yours." "No, it isn't," I said softly. He swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed once, hard. "Well, you must have forgotten," he muttered, walking past me. He brushed my shoulder in that sharp, dismissive way he did when he didn't want to be questioned. I didn't push. Not then. Not yet. But the unease took root. That night, he went to bed early, claiming he had a headache. He turned onto his side, away from me, and fell asleep too fast, unnaturally fast, like a man trying to escape into dreams before reality caught up to him. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Something wasn't right. I felt it like a stone in my chest. But a single wine glass wasn't enough to accuse a man of betrayal, not after nearly a decade of marriage. Not after all the times I'd told myself we were simply going through phases. So, I let it go. Or tried to. Days passed, then a week, then 2. But once you notice one strange thing, all the others start revealing themselves like dominoes falling in slow motion.
He started showering as soon as he came home. He began locking his phone, something he never used to do. He took longer drives, claiming he needed air. He acted nervous when he got texts, tilting the screen away from me. And late at night, long after he thought I was asleep, I'd hear the gentle buzz of his phone, followed by soft, urgent whispers. The kind reserved for intimacy, or for secrets. One evening, I walked into the living room and caught him smiling at his phone. Not the soft smile he used to give me, but one that made his whole face soften. A smile that didn't belong to me anymore. When he saw me, he jumped, like I'd caught him in the middle of a crime. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "I just came to ask if you wanted tea." "Oh." He set his phone down face first. "No, I'm good." His tone made my throat tighten. And that was when the tiny seed of doubt, the one planted by that wine glass, began to grow. I didn't want to believe he was cheating. I didn't want to believe he could lie to me that way. But something inside me was waking up. The part of a woman that senses danger before she can put it into words. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't insecurity. It was intuition. Old female intuition whispering, "Prepare yourself. Something is coming. He is hiding more than you think." But even then, even with all the signs twirling right in front of my face, nothing prepared me for what would come next. Nothing prepared me for the cruelty, the manipulation, the way he would weaponize my trust, my compassion, my love. And nothing, absolutely nothing prepared me for the moment he pretended to be dying. That was the beginning of the storm.
People think the beginning of a marriage's end comes with screaming or cheating or a slammed door. But in my case, it started with a phone call. A trembling, frantic phone call that made my knees buckle underneath me. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the break room at work, waiting for the microwave to finish reheating leftover stew. I remember the smell, tomatoes and thyme warming in the air, when my phone rang. David's coworker, Mark. We weren't close, but I knew him well enough to know he never called me unless something was wrong. I answered quickly. "Hello?" His voice was sharp, rattled. Is this David's wife?" "Yes? What's going on?" "He collapsed," Mark blurted out. "At work, chest pain. The ambulance just took him to the hospital." I froze. The microwave beeped behind me, loud and jarring, but I couldn't move. Collapsed? Chest pain? Ambulance? My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my fingertips. "What hospital?" I managed to choke out. By the time he told me, my purse was already in my hand. I left the food in the microwave, the door swinging open, stew burning at the edges. I barely remember the drive, except that I kept praying under my breath, "Please, God, please." Every red light felt like a punishment. Every slow driver felt like a personal attack. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, sweat pooling beneath my palms. When I reached the hospital, I ran. Past the reception desk, past the crowded chairs, past the smell of disinfectant that stung my nose. "Ma'am, you can't..." But I didn't hear the nurse calling after me. I knew where the emergency room was. I knew the look of people waiting for answers. I burst through the double doors and saw him, David, lying on a gurney, pale, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in shallow jerks. My heart cracked. "David!" I rushed to him. "Oh my God, what happened?" A nurse stepped between us. "Ma'am, we're running tests. Please give us space." His eyes fluttered open weakly, and he whispered, barely audible, "It hurts. My chest." My legs went weak. I grabbed the rail of the bed to steady myself. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. They wheeled him away for an EKG. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, shivering, though the room wasn't cold. In that moment, everything else disappeared. The wine glass, the late-night texts, the distant behavior. All I could think was, please don't let him die. Please don't let me lose him. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. 30. Time stretched thin like a thread about to snap. Finally, a doctor approached me. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes," I breathed. Is he okay?" The doctor gave a careful, practiced smile, the kind that wasn't quite reassuring. "We're still evaluating. His symptoms are consistent with a cardiac episode, but his initial tests are inconclusive. We'll need to keep him for observation tonight." "A cardiac episode?" I repeated, the words tasting metallic in my mouth. "It may be minor, it may be stress-related. We'll know more soon." Stress. That word echoed through me. Could the tension between us have done this? Had I missed something important? Guilt wrapped around me like cold hands. When I went to see him again, he looked smaller somehow, fragile. He reached for my hand, fingers trembling. "I thought I was dying," he whispered hoarsely. Tears spilled down my cheeks. "Don't say that." He squeezed my hand weakly, a soft squeeze, desperate almost, and in that moment my heart softened completely. Every suspicion evaporated like mist. The man lying in that hospital bed wasn't a cheater. He wasn't distant, he wasn't secretive. He was my husband, the man I had vowed to love in sickness and in health. I stayed by his side that night, watching the monitors blink rhythmically, listening to the slow beep, beep, beep that marked the fragile rhythm of his heart. Around midnight, he drifted into sleep. His breathing steadied. I sat there, holding his hand, brushing his hair back gently, feeling every part of me ache with worry. A nurse brought me a blanket. "You should rest," she whispered. But I couldn't, because somewhere deep inside me, I was terrified. Terrified of losing him. Terrified that this would be our new life. Hospital rooms, medication, watching him fade. I prayed. I cried quietly. I whispered to him, even though he couldn't hear, "I love you. We'll get through this." And I meant it. With every ounce of me, I meant it. But here's the cruelest part. The part that still makes my chest tighten when I remember it. While I sat there that night, believing my husband was fighting for his life, he wasn't. He wasn't dying. He wasn't even sick. He wasn't fighting for anything. He was planning something so manipulative, so deeply cruel, that no one, not even I, could have imagined it. But the truth wouldn't reveal itself just yet. That was still to come. Still waiting in the shadows, ready to break me. The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of machines and the faint scent of diluted sanitizer. My neck ached from sleeping upright in the stiff visitor's chair, my fingers still loosely wrapped around David's. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Hey," I whispered, my voice scratchy. "How are you feeling?" He glanced at me, then quickly looked away. "Like someone hit my chest with a hammer," he muttered. I squeezed his hand gently. "We're going to take it one day at a time, okay?" He didn't answer. A faint unease flickered through me. Just a flicker, subtle but noticeable. I pushed it down. He was scared, overwhelmed. Anyone would be. An hour later, a doctor walked in, a different one than the night before. Older, softer voice, kind eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter." We both looked up anxiously. "We've reviewed your overnight readings," the doctor said, flipping through a chart, "and your heart appears stable. In fact, all of your tests are looking normal." "Normal?" I repeated. "But he collapsed." "Yes," the doctor said gently, "but none of the results show signs of cardiac distress. No elevated enzymes, no irregularities in the EKG.
David's jaw tightened. "So what are you saying?" he snapped. "I'm saying," the doctor said carefully, "that this may have been a stress-related episode, a panic attack possibly. We'd like to run one more scan, but unless something new appears, we may discharge you today." Discharge? Today? Already? I should have felt relieved. I should have thanked God. But something tightened in my stomach, a small knot of confusion that refused to loosen. David didn't look relieved. He looked annoyed. As soon as the doctor left, he threw the blanket off his legs. "This is ridiculous. They don't know what they're doing." "David, what are you talking about?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. He just turned away from me, facing the wall, his shoulders stiff, his breathing sharp. I looked at him, studying the rigid line of his spine. Something was wrong. Not with his heart, not with his body. Something deeper. Something he wasn't saying. Still, I swallowed the unease. I told myself to be patient. He was scared and frustrated. Anyone would be. But then the first real clue appeared. A nurse came in to remove his IV. She was polite but brisk. "You'll be discharged soon. Your wife can help you gather your things." I nodded, reaching for his clothes. His phone sat on the little bedside table. He grabbed it before I could. That wasn't suspicious on its own. Lots of people are protective of their phones. But what happened next, that's what caught my heart. He turned his body away from me, shielding the screen with his hand. His thumbs moved quickly, almost frantically. I wasn't trying to pry. God knows I wasn't looking for trouble. But I caught one thing, just one flash across the screen before he turned away completely. A name. S.B. 2 letters. Nothing more. But something about them, something about the way he instantly tilted the screen, something about the urgency in his fingers. It didn't feel like nothing. Still, I pushed the thought aside. This was not the time to suspect my husband of anything. He had just collapsed. He had scared me half to death. But the second clue, that one was harder to ignore. He insisted, absolutely insisted, on being discharged without me present. Around noon, a nurse said, "Mrs. Carter, you can go down to the pharmacy and pick up these prescriptions." Before I could even stand, David said sharply, "No, I don't need anything. I'm not taking meds." The nurse looked surprised. "Sir, these are standard to manage." I said no. His voice cut through the room like a blade. I stared at him. "David, don't you think—" "I'm fine, Miriam," he snapped. "I just want to go home." The nurse left quickly. I swallowed my concerns. "Okay, I'll get the car." But he shook his head. "No, I'm calling Mark. He's right around the corner. He'll take me." I blinked. "Mark? Why? I'm right here." "I don't want you dragging yourself around. You were up all night," he said flatly, already lifting his phone again. "Just go home. I'll meet you there." It didn't make sense. Why couldn't I drive him? Why did he insist on separating from me? Why did he snap at the nurse so quickly? I stood there for a moment, feeling something inside me sink, heavy and low. But I told myself, as wives often do, he's not himself, let it go. So I left. I walked through the parking lot under the noon sun, feeling strangely out of place. People were moving around me, laughing, talking, living, while my chest felt hollow. When I reached home, the house felt too quiet, too still. I walked through each room slowly. Kitchen, living room, our bedroom. Everything was the same, and yet
Nothing felt the same. I sat on the couch and waited. An hour passed, then 2, and just when I started worrying again, I heard the front door click open. I stood, smoothing my blouse, trying to steady my nerves. David walked in slowly, one hand on the wall, as if to support himself, but behind him, clinging to the edge of the frame, was Mark. I blinked. "Thank you," David murmured quietly to him. "No problem, man," but his eyes flicked to me, nervous, awkward, apologetic even. I stepped forward. "David, why did it take you so long? I've been—" "Traffic," he cut me off. His tone was oddly cold. I opened my mouth to ask something else, but then I saw it. When he shifted his weight, when he leaned a little too dramatically against the wall, his eyes didn't wince, his breath didn't hitch, his chest didn't tremble. He wasn't in pain. Not even a little. Something pricked at the back of my mind. Doubt. More real now, more solid. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because marriages don't break in a single moment. They unravel thread by thread, and mine had just lost another one.
For the first few hours after he came home, I hovered around him quietly, the way someone might hover over a fallen bird, afraid to touch it, but terrified to leave it alone. He said very little. He barely looked at me. He went straight to the bedroom and lay down, throwing an arm over his eyes in a dramatic gesture that didn't match the relaxed rhythm of his breathing. I tried to convince myself that it was just exhaustion, stress, fear, anything but what that voice deep in my chest kept whispering. Something is wrong. Something is very wrong. Still, I cooked dinner. Chicken soup, his favorite. I chopped onions with fingers that trembled. I stirred the broth slowly, the steam fogging my glasses. I carried the bowl to the bedroom, softly. "David, you should try to eat something." He didn't even open his eyes. "Not hungry." "You need your strength." "I said no, Miriam," he muttered, his voice low and sharp. I set the bowl down on the nightstand, swallowing the hurt. He had just come home from the hospital. I wasn't going to start an argument. But as the hours ticked by, the tension in the house thickened. It was like walking through invisible threads, tight, fragile, waiting to snap. Around 9 p.m., I brought him water. He was on his phone again. That same position, shoulders turned slightly away, thumbs moving fast. He lowered the screen the second he heard me. Too fast. I stood there, my heart knocking hard against my ribs. "Who are you texting?" I asked calmly. He didn't even hesitate. "Work." "It's late." I said it's work. The tone, clipped, dismissive, hit something old inside me, something I'd ignored too many times. The woman I used to be would have apologized and walked away, but something about the hospital, the strange discharge, the distant behavior, the name SB, the secrecy, it pushed me. "I just want to understand," I whispered. He turned to me then, slowly, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, annoyance. Annoyance at me, at my concern, at my presence. "Miriam, I don't need you hovering over me. I don't need you questioning my every move. I nearly died yesterday. Can you let me breathe?" The words stung. Nearly died. But the doctor said... I didn't finish the thought. I was afraid of what would follow. I stepped back. "Okay," I murmured. "I'll give you space." But inside, something cracked. Not broken. Not yet, but cracked. I tried to sleep that night, but rest wouldn't come. I lay awake, listening to the faint sounds from the bedroom, the creak of the mattress, the soft buzz of his phone,
the low, muffled hum of his voice, speaking quietly, speaking to someone. At one point, I thought I heard him laugh, softly, barely a breath, but a laugh nonetheless. At 2:17 a.m., I finally got out of bed. I padded quietly down the hall. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed, just pressed lightly shut. A sliver of light spilled out beneath it. His voice was low, too low to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Warm, soft, gentle. The kind of tone he hadn't used with me in months, maybe longer. My heart began to pound in my ears. My hands shook so hard I pressed them against my thighs. I leaned toward the door, not touching, not pushing, just listening. I caught one word, just one, a whisper, soft and intimate. Baby. A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't talking to a doctor. He wasn't talking to Mark. He wasn't talking to anyone from work. No husband, no man afraid of dying whispers baby at 2 a.m. unless he's not scared at all, unless he's living a different life behind that door. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. Part of me wanted to burst in, confront him, scream, demand the truth. But another part, the older, wiser part, whispered, not like this, not without thinking, not without knowing. So instead, I stepped back. Slowly, quietly. I returned to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, feeling the room tilt around me. He was cheating. He had to be. Nothing else fit. But why fake a heart episode? Why push me away at the hospital? Why insist on coming home separately? None of it made sense. Not yet. But the breaking point came a few minutes later, when his door finally opened and he stepped out. He must not have known I was awake because he didn't move carefully. He didn't hide his expression. A soft, relaxed smile, the kind of smile he never gave me anymore. He walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, poured himself a glass of juice. Not a single wince, not a single gesture of pain, just normal, healthy, alive. I watched him from the shadow of the hallway, and that's when he said something to himself under his breath that froze my blood solid. Tomorrow, he murmured. She'll be here tomorrow. She. Not they, not the nurse, not family. She. My breath caught in my throat. Tomorrow, a woman. Coming here? To our home? My knees buckled, and I pressed my hand against the wall to keep myself upright. Every beat of my heart felt like a punch against my ribs. He returned to the bedroom, humming lightly, and I stood there trembling as the truth began to take shape, a shape so unbelievable, so cruel, I refused to let myself accept it fully. Not yet. But deep inside, I knew something catastrophic was coming, something that would break the last remains of our marriage, something that would change my life forever.
I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders long after the sun rose, staring at the wall while the house grew from dim gray to pale morning light. I heard him moving around the bedroom, showering, shaving, humming. That alone nearly shattered me. A man who'd supposedly had a medical emergency just a day before wouldn't be humming in the bathroom mirror. Not unless he had a reason to be happy. Not unless he was getting ready for someone. For her. A little after 10 a.m., he walked out into the living room, startled when he noticed me sitting there. "Oh," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're up." "I never slept," I answered softly. He nodded once, just once, and looked away. Not worried, not guilty, just irritated. "I have someone coming by today," he said. "It's urgent. Work stuff." I stared at him. He didn't even try. "You said you needed rest," I whispered. "You said you were recovering." He waved a hand. "I'm fine. More than fine. They just overreacted at the hospital." My stomach twisted. Overreacted? Then why the dramatic collapse? Why the secrecy? Why? I didn't ask. I couldn't. He was already walking away, grabbing his jacket, fussing with his hair, that small, almost boyish smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. A smile he hadn't given me in years. At 10:42 a.m., everything snapped. Because at 10:42 a.m., someone knocked on our door. A soft, quick knock, almost musical. The kind of knock from someone who expects to be welcomed, someone familiar. He rushed toward the door, too fast, too eager. And when he opened it, my breath left my body. She stood there, a woman in her late 20s, maybe 30, tall, long dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, a fitted beige coat, a thin gold necklace resting at her collarbone, and eyes that lifted toward him with warmth, comfort, relief. "David," she breathed. She said it like she was finally home. He smiled, wide, unrestrained, glowing, the kind of smile I had once lived for. He stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "You came." She nodded, her lips curving. "Of course I did." And then, God help me, they almost embraced. Almost. They caught themselves at the last second, remembering, maybe, that a wife lived here. But their bodies leaned in, instinctively. Their faces close. Too close. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. I stood up from the couch slowly. "Miriam," he said, straightening, clearing his throat. "This is..." But the woman stepped forward, her face sliding into a polite, controlled expression, the kind of people wear when they want to hide something. "Sarah," she said quickly. "From David's office." I looked at her. Really looked at her. The immaculate grooming, the neutral perfume drifting lightly through the air, the way her eyes flicked to him, then back to me, calculating, the familiarity in her posture, the way she held her bag, the way she positioned herself subtly closer to him, ready to slide into a role she shouldn't have. They weren't coworkers. Coworkers don't look at each other like that. They don't arrive at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. They don't whisper, "You came." They don't almost hug in front of the wife. I swallowed, my throat burning. "Oh," I said softly. "A coworker." Her eyes dropped, just for a second. Guilt. A flash of it. David stepped between us slightly, a move so subtle, so instinctive, it turned my stomach. "So," I said gently, "what brings you here?" Silence. A silence so heavy it wrapped around all three of us like smoke. Then she spoke, choosing her words one by one. "I came to check on him, after the hospital." My days snapped to David. "You told her?" I asked. He looked away. Something inside me cracked wide open. He hadn't told me any details, but he told her. He hadn't wanted me at the hospital, but he wanted her. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed calm, unnervingly calm. "So, you were worried enough to rush over here, but not worried enough to contact his wife." She froze. David stiffened. And in that tiny moment, in the way their eyes darted to each other, I finally saw the truth with devastating clarity. This wasn't
emotional support. This wasn't friendship. This wasn't work. This was betrayal. This was intimate, hidden, cultivated, nurtured. This woman didn't look at him with concern. She looked at him with possession. And worse, he looked back at her with familiarity. I took a slow breath. "My husband nearly died yesterday," I whispered. Both of them swallowed hard. "And you're the one he called?" Neither answered. They didn't have to. The silence answered for them. I felt the room sway, not from dizziness, but from clarity, a clarity that made everything sharp, bright, painful. I looked at David, my husband, of nearly 2 decades, and saw a stranger who had chosen another woman over me, a stranger who had let me sit alone in a hospital while he whispered to her, a stranger who smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. My voice came out, steady, stronger than I expected. "Both of you need to leave," I said. David blinked. "Miriam." "I said leave." Sarah stepped back slightly. David stared at me like he had never seen me before. Good. Let him see the woman who finally woke up. Let him see the woman who wouldn't be walked over anymore. Let him see the woman he underestimated. Because something deep inside me had finally broken. But not in the way he expected. It broke open. It broke awake. And I knew with spine-chilling certainty that this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning.
David didn't move. Sarah didn't either. For a moment, the three of us stood there in the quiet morning light, the thin lace curtains fluttering just slightly from the heater vent. I could hear my own heartbeat steady. Not frantic, not lost. Steady. Like a drum waking me from a long sleep. "Miriam," David said carefully, "let's talk about this." He reached for me with one hand, palm half open, a gesture I'd seen countless times when he wanted to soften me, to coax me into agreement before he told me something I didn't want to hear. I stepped back. His hand froze in the air before he lowered it slowly. "Talk about what?" I asked. "The part where she rushed to check on a married man in his home at 10 in the morning?" Sarah's fingers tightened around her handbag strap. She looked at him again before looking at me, as though waiting for permission. That alone said everything. "Sarah," I said softly, too softly, "how long have you two been seeing each other?" She inhaled, but no sound came out. David stepped forward, blocking her view of me in a way so protective it nearly stunned me. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't you dare protect her from a question you caused." His jaw flexed that tiny tick I used to think was stress. Now I knew it was avoidance, defensiveness, guilt, or all three. He exhaled sharply through his nose. "Fine," he said. "If you want the truth so badly." I didn't flinch. Not anymore. He rubbed his face with both hands, pacing once behind the sofa like he needed momentum to throw the truth out of himself. "We've been seeing each other for a few months." Sarah looked down at the floor, her lips tightening. "A few months. My home, my marriage, my life. And it had already been infiltrated for months without me knowing?" I nodded once. "So it started while you were still telling me you loved me, while we were still trying to fix things?" His eyes flicked away. Another answer in silence. I took a breath. Slow, deep, controlled. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" His laugh came out bitter. "Tell you? Miriam, you don't listen anymore. You hear what you want. You twist everything." My eyes widened, pain slicing through me. Sarah shifted slightly. "David." But he continued, running right over her attempt to slow him down. "You make everything hard, everything dramatic. I tried. I really tried to stay, to make this work. But you're always suspicious, always emotional." I felt my lips part slowly, like my mind needed time to realize he wasn't confessing. He was blaming me. I steadied my voice. "David, did you fake your illness?" That stopped him. Stopped Sarah, too. The question hung in the air like smoke. He didn't answer. Not with his mouth, anyway. But his eyes, they flickered with something between panic and annoyance. I felt heat rising in my chest. Not rage, not hysteria. Something sharper. Something cleaner. "You staged it. The collapse. The hospital scene. All of it. So I'd leave the house?" Sarah gasped softly. "David, you didn't tell me that." He shot her a harsh look. Too harsh. Too sudden. The kind that told me she was hearing this part for the first time. Her brows pulled together. "You told me she forced him to go to the hospital, that she was exaggerating." Forced him? Exaggerating? I felt like I was standing in the middle of a nightmare that each second grew more grotesque. "Did you tell her I was abusive?" I asked quietly. Sarah blinked twice. Not fast enough. I let out a tired, humorless breath. "Of course you did." David dragged a hand down his face. "I needed space. I needed time to figure out how to talk to you. She understood things you never... She understood you because you lied to her, too." His mouth snapped shut. I looked at Sarah. "This man," I said softly, "won't tell you the truth until it serves him. Please don't think you're immune." She swallowed, her throat bobbing. David turned on me, anger rising in his face. "I'm not going to stand here and let you paint me as the villain." "Then stop acting like one." Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And that's when something inside me settled like dust finally landing after being shaken for too long. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't confused. I wasn't begging for an explanation that would make me feel better. I was done. Completely, utterly done. "You both need to leave," I repeated, my voice calm. "Now." Sarah took a small step back. David turned toward her, whispering something too low for me to catch. Whatever it was, her face changed. The softness fell away. The warmth evaporated. She looked at him with something like disappointment or realization. Then she turned toward me. "I'm sorry. Truly. I shouldn't have come." And for the first time since she walked in, I believed her. But I wasn't ready to accept her apology. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She slipped past him and walked out the door without looking back. David stayed rooted to the floor, staring at me as though he expected the scene to shift into another direction, a familiar direction, with forgiveness or tears or begging. But I simply crossed my arms over my chest, feeling taller than I had in years. "I want you out by tonight. You can sleep on the couch until then, but you will pack your things and you will leave." His eyes widened. "You're kicking me out of my own house?" I said, "It stopped being your house the day you invited another woman into it." He opened his mouth, then closed it. And without another word, he turned and walked to the guest room, slamming the door behind him. I didn't flinch. Not even a little. Because the truth was finally out. The wound was open. And now that the infection had been exposed to the air, the healing could finally begin. The moment David disappeared behind the guest room door, the house fell into a strange kind of quiet. Not peaceful, not comfortable. It was the quiet of aftershocks. That eerie stillness when a storm has passed, but the trees are still bent, the earth still trembling. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the door he slammed, then at the front door, where Sarah had fled, then at my own hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised me. I expected fear. I expected panic. I expected the familiar tightening in my chest, the feeling I used to get whenever David was angry. But all I felt was clarity. A clarity so sharp it almost hurt. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table. The same table where I had served him breakfast, asked him about work, listened to excuses, and swallowed my own loneliness. Now, for the first time in years, I felt like I had permission to breathe. But clarity alone doesn't rebuild a life. It only lights the path. The first step, I knew, was telling someone. And yet, even with everything he'd done, something inside me hesitated. The old conditioning, the voice that said, "Keep family matters private. Don't embarrass him. It's not abuse if he never hit you. Other women endure worse." I closed my eyes. That voice wasn't mine. It was the voice I grew up with. The voice of women in my family who believed survival meant silence. I opened my eyes again, reached for my phone, and scrolled to my sister's number. Her name, Deborah, glowed on the screen. We hadn't been as close in the last few years, not because of a fight, but because of life, responsibilities, distance, marriage. But I knew her heart was steady, loyal, and warm. I pressed call before I could change my mind. She answered on the second ring. "Mary? Is everything okay?" Her voice, gentle, familiar, cracked something in me. Not a breakdown. Something quieter. The release of a weight I had been holding too tightly. "No," I said. "No, it's not." She instantly softened her tone. "What happened? Are you hurt? Is David?" "He cheated, and he brought her here, to our house." Silence. Then, slowly, the sound of her angry inhale. "Oh, Miriam, sweetheart, I'm coming over." "No," I said quickly. "I don't want a scene." "Well, you're getting me anyway," she said. I almost laughed. Almost. It felt strange to hear someone choose me without hesitation. We hung up, and I sat there, hands wrapped around the cool glass, staring at the kitchen clock as minutes ticked by. The fridge hummed, a neighbor's car door shut outside. Life continued, unaware that mine had split open. Then a soft sound. Footsteps. David coming out. He didn't leave the guest room just yet. Just hovered at the threshold, leaning against the doorframe like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed in the rest of the house. We didn't speak. He didn't apologize. I didn't invite him to try. He only gave me a long, searching look, one I refused to interpret, and retreated back inside. Good. Let him sit with the echo of his choices. 20 minutes later, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I stood as two short beeps sounded, Deborah's way of saying, "I'm here, but I won't rush you." I opened the door before she could knock. One look at my face, and she wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a dramatic hug, not tight or desperate. It was grounding, the kind of embrace that lets you know you're not alone. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears didn't come. She pulled back, studying me. "Tell me everything," she said. And I did. We sat in the living room, sunlight warming the rug,
my voice steady as I told her how he faked his illness, how Sarah showed up at the door, how he blamed me, how I asked him to leave. Deborah listened silently. When I finished, she took a deep breath, rubbing her hands together the way she does when she's trying to contain her anger. "Miriam," she said quietly, "you need to protect yourself. Men like him, they don't crumble. They retaliate." That thought hadn't occurred to me. "What do you mean?" I asked. She leaned closer. "When people are exposed, they panic. They lash out. They lie bigger. They twist the story. You need someone in your corner. And you need evidence." Evidence. The word lodged itself deep in my mind. I thought of the hospital, the dramatic collapse, his messages I hadn't seen, his expenses I had ignored, his sudden late nights, the lies layered on lies. I realized then that if I didn't protect myself, he would rewrite history. "I'll help you," Deborah said, "but we need a lawyer." "A lawyer?" I whispered. "Already?" "Yes." Her voice was firm. "Already." I looked toward the hallway where David had shut himself away. The thought of lawyers, documents, consequences, it all felt heavy, too heavy for one day. But Deborah was right. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a dismantling of a life built over years. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "Okay." "Good." She squeezed my hand. "Now let's get you out of here for a few hours. Being in the same house with him is dangerous emotionally." She was right again. I packed a small overnight bag, just a few essentials, and we walked to her car together. But before I stepped out, I paused in the doorway and looked back at the house. The house I had cooked meals in, cleaned, decorated, filled with laughter once, endured, stayed, hoped. Now, it felt like a stranger's house, a shell. David didn't come out to stop me. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't try to talk. Just silence. I stepped into the fresh air, letting it fill my lungs. Deborah's hand touched my back gently. "You're doing the right thing." Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. But I was doing something. Moving. Choosing myself. And that was a start. We drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, and with every passing meter, I felt a piece of the old me fall away. Not the good parts, not the loving parts, not the gentle parts, but the parts that had been conditioned to shrink, to stay quiet, to make excuses, to accept less than what I deserved. And somewhere inside me, a small voice, one I hadn't heard in a long time, whispered, "Keep going." I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I was no longer trapped. And that was the beginning of everything.
The next morning, I woke in Deborah's guest room to sunlight spilling over pale walls, the hum of the refrigerator from the small kitchenette below. For the first time in days, I didn't feel trapped in a cloud of doubt and dread. But the clarity I'd felt yesterday had shifted into determination. I wasn't leaving. Not emotionally, not financially, not without making him face what he'd done. Deborah had already made a list, a lawyer, documents, proof. "First thing," she said, handing me a notebook with everything scribbled out neatly. "Get records of the hospital visit, any bills, emails, texts, everything that proves he staged this." I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. My hands felt steady now, the kind of steady born from the realization that you have nothing left to lose. We drove to the hospital together.
I walked into the records office with my head high, rehearsing nothing. Deborah didn't let me waver. When the receptionist asked for my information, I gave it clearly. David Carter. Hospitalization date. Relationship. Wife. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't need to. The clerk handed me the paperwork, a detailed account of David's vitals, tests, doctor's notes, and nurse observations. I scanned it quickly. Nothing abnormal. Nothing indicating a heart attack. Just a lot of notes about him being alert, oriented, ambulatory, and patient exhibits signs of stress but medically stable. My chest tightened. I read it again. Then again. It was all there. I was holding the truth in my hands. Later that day, we went through David's emails and phone records with careful precision. One message after another, conversations with Sarah, detailed long lunches, private evenings, subtle plans for moving in soon. A sudden surge of anger bubbled inside me, but I didn't act on it immediately. I didn't scream. I didn't call them names. Instead, I documented, photographed, saved, cross-referenced. Every text, every email, every detail of his fake collapse carefully archived. Because when I confronted him, I wouldn't need to beg or plead. I wouldn't need to explain. I'd let the truth speak. That night, I returned home with Deborah. The house felt colder, empty, still. David had stayed in the guest room again, probably pretending to rest, pretending to be the victim. I didn't enter the house through the front door. I waited in the driveway, Deborah beside me. Then I called him. "David," I said calmly, letting my voice carry across the silence. "I want you to come out of the guest room." He didn't answer immediately. "David," I said again, firmer this time. "Now." A pause. Then a slow, deliberate step toward the hallway. The door opened just enough for him to peek out. "What do you want, Miriam?" His voice was tired, forced. "I want the truth," I said, holding up my notebook. "The truth about the hospital, the truth about Sarah, the truth about what you've been planning." His eyes narrowed. "You're crazy." "Am I?" I asked softly. "Or am I awake for the first time in 20 years? He stepped fully into the living room. He looked at me for the first time. No pretense, no calculated charm. Only guilt. Only fear. I opened the notebook. Point by point. Hospital records, messages, emails, plans. Every lie cataloged. He looked at it and finally, he spoke. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Didn't mean for it to get this far," I repeated, voice trembling with controlled fury. "You faked a heart attack. You let your mistress move into our home. You lied to my face. You lied to everyone. Didn't mean for it to get this far." He flinched. I could see the cracks in his composure. I could see the man who had built his lies unraveling. "I was scared," he whispered. "I thought you'd never understand." I shook my head slowly. "You've never wanted me to understand, David. You've wanted me to stay quiet, to watch, to pretend, and I did, until now." I closed the notebook with a snap. "I want you out. You have 48 hours to get your things and leave. Sarah is never to come back. And no more lies. If you contact her or lie about this again, there will be legal consequences." He opened his mouth to argue. I didn't let him. "I made your choices," I said softly. "Now live with them. I'm done giving you chances you don't deserve." The weight of those words hung in the air like a bell tolling. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He only looked at me, and I realized truly that he knew he'd lost. And for the first time in years, I felt free. That night, Deborah and I sat in the kitchen. I poured 2 glasses of wine, not celebratory, not bitter. Just a quiet acknowledgement. "We'll start the legal process tomorrow," she said. I nodded. "But you need to sleep. Your mind needs to stop replaying him." I leaned back, taking a sip. The taste was dark, grounding, bitter and real. I thought of the hospital, the lies, the betrayal, the small, quiet victories, calling my sister, documenting everything, standing up. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I felt the shift. From powerless, from trapped, from scared, to in control.
The next week, everything I had meticulously documented came into play. First, the lawyer handled the hospital records and communications with David's office. The truth was undeniable. He couldn't argue with cold, hard evidence, messages, emails, records, timelines. Every lie he had spun crumbled quietly but completely. David tried to spin his story socially, to friends, to colleagues, even to family. But it wasn't just the lawyer's letter. It was the way I carried myself that told the story more effectively than any words could. I didn't go around gossiping. I didn't scream accusations in public. I simply lived my truth calmly. People noticed. One by one, friends started reaching out, offering small words of support. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this." I let the words wash over me without needing to explain further. The shame, the embarrassment, it had been his burden to carry, not mine. Sarah's presence in his office and in our lives became impossible to maintain. Once I had alerted the company to the harassment and the ethical breaches, the fact that he had schemed to move her into a marital home under false pretenses, she quietly disappeared. No confrontation, no dramatic scene, just gone. I never contacted her. I didn't need to. She faded on her own. David's reputation, however, took a slower, more deliberate fall. At work, whispers circulated. Friends and family began to notice how tense he had become, how he avoided me in public spaces. The carefully curated image of the perfect husband, the attentive, loving partner he pretended to be, had collapsed. People looked at him differently. Not with malice, not with glee, but with the unmistakable understanding that he had done something wrong, something cruel, and the universe, social and personal, had corrected the balance. The house, my house, became mine again. I spent hours walking through each room, remembering the moments that had belonged to both of us. The kitchen, where we laughed over breakfast, the living room where we argued and sometimes reconciled, the garden where he had pretended to care about my roses. Now every inch belonged to me, but not in the way I had imagined it before. Not a space to share, not a space to forgive, a space to reclaim. I repainted walls. I rearranged furniture. I added plants where he had dismissed them. I filled the house with small touches that reminded me I was living for myself, not for anyone else's approval or deception. Friends came over. Deborah stayed for long visits. We cooked together. We laughed quietly, gently, as though we were reclaiming stolen time. The first time David tried to enter the house after being officially told to leave, I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I simply reminded him of the boundaries, legal and personal. And he went. Finally. At family gatherings, I noticed subtle shifts in perception. Relatives who had been unsure or skeptical of the tension began treating me differently. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with respect. They saw me standing taller,
speaking firmly, refusing to be manipulated, refusing to be diminished. The hardest moments weren't the confrontations, though. They were the quiet ones. Walking through my home alone, sitting in the living room where he had once held court, feeling the empty spaces where trust had been ripped away. But slowly, I learned to fill those spaces myself. The public consequences weren't dramatic or cinematic. There were no newspaper headlines, no viral videos, but in small, subtle ways, they were complete. Neighbors who had whispered in my absence no longer questioned me. Colleagues who had nodded politely at David no longer offered him unearned admiration. The woman he had tried to insert into my life was gone. He was left to live with the results of his choices, the social isolation, the loss of trust, and the knowledge that deception always carries a cost. And I was free. Even more quietly, I noticed a shift inside myself. I walked taller. I spoke more firmly. I no longer waited for permission to exist fully in my own life. I didn't need validation from him or anyone else. The world, which had once felt like it might crumble around me, now stretched wide, open, full of possibility. I still carried the memory of his betrayal, of the hospital, of Sarah. But it didn't weigh me down. It didn't define me. It was simply a chapter I had survived, and one I had turned into strength. That week, as I sat in the garden watering my plants, I realized something. Freedom isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It isn't instantaneous. It's quiet. It's deliberate. It's knowing you no longer have to live according to someone else's lies. And when I breathed in the morning air, sunlight warming my face, I understood that the true consequence wasn't his humiliation, though that existed. The true consequence was justice. Balanced, honest, real. And the beauty of it? I didn't have to seek revenge to create it. I simply acted, documented, and lived truthfully.
The weeks after David left were quiet, but they weren't empty. I woke up each morning and walked through the house with a sense of purpose that had been absent for years. The air smelled different, fresher, as if the walls themselves had been cleansed of deceit. The rooms that had once held tension now held light. I repainted the guest room, not to erase him, but to reclaim it. Soft, pale blue walls, curtains that caught the morning sun. I placed a small bookshelf in the corner, filled with books I had never had time to read. Even my own hobbies, long neglected, returned to me. I picked up the sewing machine tucked in the corner of the craft room, mended old quilts, and started small projects that reminded me I could create beauty with my own hands, without needing anyone's approval. Friends and family became my new anchor. Deborah stayed close, offering counsel when decisions felt overwhelming. Our weekend lunches became ritual, not dramatic or sad, but steady and warm. My mother called more often, asking about my day instead of questioning my marriage. My nieces and nephews visited, bringing laughter into the quiet rooms. Even David's absence, once a source of anxiety, became part of my healing. I realized I didn't need him to define my life. I didn't need his presence to feel whole. The void he left wasn't emptiness, it was space to breathe. I began volunteering at a local support group for women who had experienced betrayal and manipulation. The first meeting was terrifying. I sat in the circle listening to stories that mirrored my own, though in some cases far worse. As they shared, I realized something profound. I wasn't broken. I wasn't alone. And the pain I had endured had purpose. When it was my turn, I spoke softly, honestly. I trusted someone I loved. I thought loyalty meant silence. I thought love meant endurance. But I learned it doesn't. Love doesn't demand that you sacrifice yourself. Love should never make you disappear. The women nodded. Some cried. Some whispered,
Thank you. And in that moment, I felt a new strength taking root. I also returned to work, not just as a routine, but as a declaration. I didn't need permission to be independent. I didn't need validation from anyone who had lied to me. I worked with purpose, finally directing my energy towards something that was mine, alone. With every project completed, with every successful negotiation or presentation, I felt pieces of myself I had lost returning. And then the hardest part, looking at the past without letting it control me. I walked through the house, stood in the kitchen, touched the counter where he had once leaned casually, pretending to care. I remembered his lies, the way he had smiled at Sarah, the hospital, the collapse, the confrontation, the legal steps. I felt anger. I felt sadness. I even felt grief. But I didn't feel trapped. I whispered to the empty room, I forgive myself for trusting too long. I forgive myself for staying when I shouldn't have. And I let go of him. The words were quiet, almost a mantra, but they carried weight. Months passed, slowly, carefully. I discovered joy again, not the loud, dramatic joy of movies or novels, the quiet, gentle kind. Sitting in the garden in the morning sun, reading a book while tea steamed in the cup beside me, baking bread and smelling it fill the house with warmth. Laughter with friends that wasn't tinged with pain or comparison. I dated cautiously, not to replace anyone, not to prove anything, but simply because life moves forward, and I had room in my heart again. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of gold and pink, I thought about the journey I had been on. I thought about David and Sarah, about the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, about the hospital and the collapse, the confrontation, the legal steps. And I realized something. The real healing didn't come from them paying the price. It didn't come from legal victories or exposing the truth or even reclaiming my home. It came from me. It came from standing up, from saying enough, from choosing myself, from acknowledging my pain but refusing to let it define me, from opening my life to light, warmth, and truth again. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I had started during the first week of freedom, I am here. I survived. I learned. I grew. I no longer fear deceit because I trust myself. I no longer shrink because of betrayal. My life is mine again, and it is beautiful in its imperfect, honest way. And for the first time in years, I slept fully. The house was quiet, yes, but it was no longer heavy. It was a home, my home. I had rebuilt. Not overnight, not magically, not perfectly, but authentically. And that, I realized, was worth more than any marriage, any illusion of love, any false loyalty ever could have been.
I often think about how easy it would have been to let him keep me small, to pretend everything was fine, to swallow the betrayal and smile for appearances. But surviving is not the same as living. And living means making choices that honor yourself, even when it hurts, even when it's hard. I share my story not for sympathy, not to shame anyone, but because I know there are women listening, sitting quietly in homes where deceit and manipulation lurk, wondering if they're imagining it, wondering if it's their fault, wondering if there is a way out. There is a way out. It begins with believing in yourself, documenting the truth, and reaching for support. It begins with standing in your own power, even when the world tells you to shrink. I am not perfect. I am not invulnerable. But I am whole, strong, free. And that is the most profound justice of all.
If you take anything from my story, let it be this: love yourself enough to walk away from what diminishes you. Protect yourself, trust your instincts, and remember, the world is bigger than anyone's lies. Would you have found the courage to stand as I did? Would you have faced the truth, even when it hurt more than you could bear? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. And if this story resonates, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of survival, courage, and healing, because we all deserve to see the light after the storm.